Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm Berghoul. Today we're going to be digging into Berghoul. What? Berghoul. Thanks for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So Berghoul is one of those terms that shows up if you study the life of Berghoul. Shows up in memoirs, in different sort of references, and sometimes even in dictionaries or plays, right? And I always read that stuff and I say, Berghoul, that sounds very exciting. It sounds very strange. What is it? They don't explain it. But I've got this wonderful memoir of a seafaring life by Spavins. He wrote this in 1796, and the great part about this book is later on he goes through and explains everything about a sailor's life in the 18th century. He was a sailor from I think 1755 all the way up through 1765, so it's a great section. And let me read to you about the food that sailors eat, or British sailors ate in the 18th century. In page 106, he talks about provisions here. He says, Every
man and boy born on the books of any of His Majesty's ships are allowed as following: a pound of biscuit bread, and a gallon of beer per day. So, a gallon of beer a day. Maybe that's not so bad, right? On Tuesdays and Saturdays, 2 pounds of beef, or else a pound of beef and a pound of flour with plums for pudding. Let's see. On Thursdays and Sundays, every 2 men has 3 pounds of pork.
Let's make up some Berghoul. So this is going to be so very, very simple. I've got some water boiling up here. I'm not even sure quite exactly how much, but probably about 4 or 5 cups. I'm going to add just a touch of salt, and it's likely on board ship they have all the salt they need, so they would add salt to this. Now you can imagine they're going to be cooking this in a giant copper vat, because they have to cook food for even a small ship might have 50 or 60 men, a military ship. A frigate, 200 men, ship of the line, 400, 500, 600 men you're going to have to cook for. So we've got some oatmeal here that's already kind of ground up, and we're going to slowly add that and stir it. And the ratio on this is probably about 3 to 1 oatmeal to water. They might cook this up for a long time, let it get very, very thick. But you can imagine at other times they had to make this in a hurry, and it would be a thin gruel, depending on what their provisions were like, whether they were running low or not. So there's another term that shows up if you're reading about sailors' food, and that's loblolly, and that's actually an earlier term for the same thing. The same thing as Berghoul. It really kind of means a frothing, bubbling, cooking mess, and so they would use that same term, and slowly over time they dropped that loblolly term, and Berghoul became the name for the same thing. Okay, here's our Berghoul. It's all done. I just added our molasses in there, and I mean, I can imagine that they might have used a blackstrap molasses, something with a lot of flavor that was very, very cheap for these sailors. I tried to use, I like baking molasses a little better than blackstrap, but that's it. It's really just oatmeal, water. We didn't use any milk. We didn't use any cream, and molasses boiled up. Let's find out how this Berghoul turned out. Yeah, I can imagine, I can see all these sailors. They're all, at their tables, and they're eating up their, they're eating up their Berghoul. It's good. It would keep you going. It would keep you energized for the day, and a very, very cheap ration. I'm not sure I can imagine it with a whole bunch of slush on it, you know, that grease and oil from the top of the cooking thing. But if you're an officer, maybe you've got a special version of Berghoul. You're gonna add a little nutmeg to it just to give it a wonderful flavor, right? So let's add a little nutmeg. We're gonna make our officer's version of Berghoul. Find out what that's gonna do to it. I'll bet you now it's gonna be something special. Even the smell of nutmeg adds something to it. Now there you go. That is a wonderful Berghoul. So this Berghoul.